Hi, everybody at the Elephant and Castle community. It's Nick from Retribe, and joining us today is Tony Hayes, who's a business coach, but he's also a man who's got a few stories. And Tony, I wish I would have hit the go live button 5 minutes ago because you had a brilliant story about your number plate and supporting Arsenal. I'm sure we'll get that in there a little bit later on, but I'm so
Okay,
happy that
no
you're an
problem.
Arsenal fan too, because I'm a lifelong Gooner. So another thing that makes us good buddies. But you are a business coach, and you help small to medium sized enterprises with. Let's get into everything that you help them with, and the Southwark community is one of a community with a lot of small businesses, a lot of entrepreneurs, and I'm
Okay.
hoping that maybe we can talk about the certain tools, certain tips, certain things that you think might be able to help people grow their business or just keep their business steady as it goes. But first of
Okay.
all, thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Um, as I said, you're a business coach, but I think we're roughly around the same age, and I'm interested to
Yes.
know. I know you spent a lot of time in London and North London and that area
Yes.
with the industries that you've been in. So I know for me, Tony, I've had 4 or 5, maybe 6 careers, you could call it, over my
Yes.
decades on the planet. How did you end up getting to where you are? How did business or work life start for Tony Hayes?
Yes, that's kind of a long story. There's one theme to it, I think, which is probably at no stage did I ever have any clarity about what I wanted to do. I just really did what I was good at most of the way along. So, for example, at school and even university, I had no idea, really where I wanted to end up.
Mm,
So, I happened to be good at languages. So I happened to be do well enough at school to get myself a place at Oxford. And that was when I first came across to England when I was 18, and studied languages at Oxford. Wasn't in any way clear all the way through to the last year what I wanted to do. And really, Oxford's a kind of a production line for accountancy firms and management consultancy firms. And for whatever reason, it just didn't appeal to me. And it was only at the very end when I went to a presentation by, I think it was either Unilever or Procter and Gamble, and they were talking about the products Persil and Ariel, the washing products,
hmm
and about the fight for market share and the nip and tuck of the marketing of these products and so on. And I thought, that's interesting. I like that, that sort of fight between products and so on. And I thought to myself, though, soap powder just really doesn't do it for me.
mm,
And I said to myself, well, what am I interested in? And of course, the answer was cars. Since I was knee high to a daisy, I'd been buying car magazines and everything else, and I thought that's what I'll do. I'll apply to the motor industry. So I had a limited number of applications. Ford, Vauxhall, Rover was around at the time, and then I had a wild card, which was a Iveco Ford truck,
mm.
and which was based in Watford. And sure enough, actually, it was a wild card, but it turned out to be most appealing in the end. And that's where I went. And fabulous graduate training for a couple of years. Stuff that crazy stuff that you wouldn't imagine, probably a week-long training and things like Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel that I still use today, still benefit from that training all that time ago, and so on. But it became clear to me that with an organization like that, I wasn't, I made a leap forward in the 2 years in terms of my grade and position, but the next place I wanted to go was a management job, and it became clear that I would have to wait my turn for that, and I was very impatient. And one of the best things, again, about my career was that I never ever applied for a job. Whenever I felt a little bit uncomfortable or things weren't working quite right, the phone would ring, and sure enough, the phone rang, and I had an offer to join a small automotive market research company in Harrow. And that was really when things really took off, because I started there as a researcher, and as you can imagine, being into cars and so on. Basically, the job was, here's a laptop, Tony. Here's a car. Here's a pile of car brochures. Take that home and enter that information that's in those car brochures into that database in the laptop. So it was like heaven, really. And you're going to pay me to
Oh,
do
for
this?
you. It's not my bag.
So anyway, it worked well. Against the boss of that firm took a leap of faith with me, and because I did that only for 6 months, the actual research, and he said, "You're wasted doing that. I want you to become UK country manager." And so this was putting me on the road out to see the car manufacturers who were buying this data and so on. I'd never been in front of a customer really for any firm at that point, and but he obviously saw something. Went out, did that, had a lot of success in the UK. Then he said, "You're wasted here. I want you to be European sales marketing manager."
Oh, wow.
Headed off, traveled all around Europe. I then had a couple of years. I took a couple of years away in the middle of that. I took a couple of years away when Daewoo Cars started up in the UK, and I was marketing planning manager there. And if anybody ever remembers the launch of Daewoo Cars in the UK, there was lots of stuff like guinea pig campaigns where we give away 200 cars for a year to people to try out and get customer feedback and so on. That was kind of my campaign. That was the second most popular direct response campaign to children in need that year. Actually brought down the telephone lines in Northwest London at one stage. So that was kind of interesting. So I had a couple of years at the launch of Daily, and then Jato, the market research company, brought me back, and I was head of sales globally, and then eventually MD. And so I was MD for 4 years. And by the end of that, so that was from the ages of 32 to 36. And because my parents were both school teachers, and they really, made me work hard and study hard. And the Oxford thing wasn't because I was a genius of any sort. It was actually really just because I worked hard to get there. And so I always had this sort of workaholic streak in me. And by the time Jato at that time was in 45 countries, and as it became more 24 hours and I became more 24 hours, and the thoughts then of making a break and doing something different came in. And I was a little bit of a different specimen then, because, I was MD of this large, division. It was a division of the company. And I thought, I was very cocky at the time. I thought I'd been there, done it, bought the t-shirt. So I thought to myself, I'll go back to Ireland and I'll teach these people how to run businesses because I've done it, seen it, got the t-shirt type of thing. And that was where the whole business coaching thing then came about and came into my head. And I came back, and also there was elements about parents there too, because I'd been in England then 18 years in total. So originally 18 years in Ireland, then 18 years in England. My life seems to go in 18-year chunks. Yeah. And funnily enough, right now, I'm 18 years as a business coach. So maybe there's a change coming up that I don't know about. But I would come home to Ireland and at Christmas see the parents, and they might come out in the summer, say, to England. And when you only see them twice a year, you really notice how they're getting older. So I thought, rather than staying in England to be a business coach, I'd be better coming to Ireland. And yeah, it's been very, very interesting since then. And a key thing that I did was, so when I came back, and it was just at the very beginning, I wasn't clear, what am I going to do here? What am I going to offer? How am I going to structure this and so on? And I stumbled across the firm called Action Coach. And that was a firm that originated in Australia by a guy called Brad Shooters. And he was one of these sort of, a true business guru. And I looked into the license that I could buy from them and all the rest of it. And I thought to myself at that time, yeah, I'm going to invest in this. And my imagination was that 80% of what I taught people and how I work with people would be from my own experience and background, and maybe 20% topped up with this action coach information and so on. It would give me that freshness. That was my concept. The truth is, from day one, it's probably been 95% action coach and about 5 or 10% my own background.
Yeah.
And even then, half the time is what not to do rather than what to do. So that was the humbling thing, maybe, that brought me down from, I know it all, down to earth, because then I realized there isn't just one way to do it. And there's lots of ways to be successful in business and so on. And to this day, I remain a licensee, a license holder for Action Coach, and I pay my royalties for the information and so on that I get from them. And it's basically because, maybe there's 1,000, 1,500 of these guys then all around the world. And it gives me access to tools that are tried and tested. And it actually sets me apart from other business coaches, because there's lots about nowadays. And because the tools and so on that I use in my business are being used, 3,000-4,000 times every day in life in businesses around the world. Whereas an independent guy, if his tools get used 3,000-4,000 times in his lifetime, he'd probably be lucky. So I use that to set myself out from the competition, if you like, and set myself apart.
It's a wonderful story. I want to get into so much. I want to get into the tools, but there's some things that you said along your journey that really interest me, because it's funny. I moved here when I was 18 from Canada, and then I'm in the 18. The 18 is a funny number. I love it. Anyway, so that's just And I had a father who was a teacher and a disciplinarian. I had a mother who literally worked her fingers to the bone, both with very, very, very strong work ethics, and they came from a coal mining village in South Yorkshire. However, that work ethic was not like, it seems that you picked up that work ethic from your parents. I didn't pick up that work ethic, Tony. What I picked up was the ability to charm and manipulate my way into situations. So I achieved a lot of success through charming, manipulating, BSing, right? And on the outside, I looked really successful. I was an entrepreneur by the mid 90s, when I'm 26, 27 years old. I was a live TV presenter for Sky Sports. I was a professional ice hockey player, which means I got paid money to play hockey. It wasn't a lot of money, but it's technically professional. And I, inside of me, because I knew I hadn't really worked for it, it was just like kind of just natural charm ability, which people say is an asset, and it is, to be able to be charming. But I felt like a fraud, I felt like an imposter. And the things that I learned about business were very old school, mid 90s, very masculine energies, like be at your desk at 8:30, beat your opponents, all competition based. So this is a couple of things I want to kind of talk to you about. Is how do you work with people who maybe not have that? And I think there's an inbuilt, like, or something, a power plant, a powerhouse where people just have the ability to show up and do things at a level where they're known as being a hard worker or a grafter. And then there are guys like me who will fake it till you make it kind of thing, and are there kind of, when you're working, I suppose specifically with younger business owners, the work ethic aspect of things has changed a lot. We're in 2023, and we see a lot of entitlement. We see a lot of, I don't want to say laziness, but a lack of motivation in certain demographics. So your personal experience as being a grafter to you being able to coach it into somebody must be, well, if I did it, you can do it. Or how do you recognize guys like me, I suppose, and how do you motivate them to be able to say, show up for yourself and for your business?
Yeah. Well, ironically, when I have a grafter, I actually really what I'm trying to do is make them work less. um, because, very often, really there's three areas where um, clients or potential clients have challenges in their business. So if you talk to them, they'll have millions of issues and challenges and things to say about their business, but actually, in reality, they condense into three pots: time, team, and money. So money, obviously, probably most popular in the sense that it's not making enough money for me, and it's not doing well enough on the financial side. And time is it's taken over my life. I'm now working 60, 70, 80, 90 hours a week. And basically the tail is wagging the dog in a sense. And then team is either I can't get the staff quite often in recent times, or more like I can't get the staff I've got to do what I want them to do type of thing. And if you really think about it, all these different issues actually condense into those three areas. So there's a definition of a business that I work to, and that is that it's a commercial, profitable enterprise that works without the owner, and that works without the owner is the key thing. So actually, somebody who's a grafter, I'm actually trying to, the whole work with the client is actually to help them make more money and help them spend less time working, and so on. So you have that type of a situation. So as I say, with the grafter, we're trying to reduce the hours, and I mean I can talk about that in a little bit. I mean, making a business work without its owner, the reason they don't work without their owner is usually because the business owner retains far too much about what they want done and how they want their business to operate in their own heads, and don't kind of let it out and make it available to the team that they have so that the team can execute. And therefore, by retaining that information, they make themselves the go-to person. Nick, what I'll do this, Nick, what I'll do with that, where's this, where's that, what's the plan here, what's the plan there. And really, of course, the perfect model actually really for any business, mine, yours, pretty much any, is of course McDonald's, where on average an employee is 16 or 17 years old, and on average a manager is about 21 years old, and on average the owner goes to the business once a month. And so it is the perfect commercial profitable enterprise that works without the owner. There's a movie about McDonald's, of course, and how the whole kind of franchise came about, and for anybody interested in this area, it's definitely worth the watch. But it basically shows how they went through a process of defining exactly how they want things to work at every stage of the process as work, in their case burgers, flow through their operation, and setting it down and then making that information available, and in fact training it into these kids really who are running businesses when at home their parents can't get them to tidy up their bedrooms. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's that type of, so that's the helping people work less kind of, that type of area. And nowadays it used to be a big job of documentation and writing stuff down and all the rest of it, but nowadays of course we use photographs to show how, I don't know, how a shop should look whenever it's ready to open and ready for customers to come in the morning. And if people want their office left in a certain way at night, you just take photographs and mark it up. And of course, video now as well is the perfect way to reduce the burden of defining this stuff. Many years ago, it was a good story. Many years ago, I had a dry cleaning / laundry firm here in Belfast, and one of the challenges with Belfast is the flight connections are not great to the rest of the world. So much goes through London really, and so on. But the big news was the first direct flight across to the States from Belfast, and I can't even remember the airline now, but there was a tender available to collect, launder and return the napkins and so on from business class and first class on that flight. And we applied for that and we won it, which was great. Very nice little piece of business because one flight a day, it arrives in the morning. So you have a man there to pick up all the stuff, bring it back to the base, launder it and clean it, bring it back out in the morning, when the flight's back, and so on, and just swap over loads and so on. Very nice little piece of opportunity. But whenever we were confirmed as winning that tender and got the job, there was a 28-page document that was handed to the guy, and literally 28 pages. And this document covered one thing, which was how to fold the napkin to make it ready, for it to be ready for business class. It took 28 pages of text to explain how it needed to be folded. Wow. And I'm thinking, could you not just done a little video and talk through a video? And so that shows you how things have moved on and so on. The other type of person, the kind of the blagger and so on. I mean, it can be coaching and so on. It isn't for everybody necessarily by any means, and so it may be that this person is not somebody who is coachable, but I would certainly obviously try and see what I could do to help them. And I think probably in most cases, them having a clear set of goals and a clear set of purpose and so on, and a reason why they need to succeed and with whatever venture and so on would probably be the first place that I start. And I find with business owners, certainly over here, the goals and so on are very kind of flaky. If I walk into a business and say, what's the goal around here? Very often people say, well, I want £1 million business. And I say, right, okay, why is that? Well, it sounds good. Or there was one guy and I said, what's your goal around here? I want 25 staff. I said, okay, why is that? Because it's like a small army. I don't really understand that, at all. So I find that the goals and those, that sort of, which I regard as foundational to a successful business, were very flaky. So the conclusion that I've come to over time, Nick, is that, much as we love our businesses and we love what we do, our businesses are just a means to an end. It is the job of our business to give us the time and the money that we want to lead the life that we want to lead. And very few people would tend to disagree with that. So, of course, my next question to them then is, well, what is that life? And again, a lot of people say, well, I don't know, I've never really thought about it. I've been too busy working to think about it, So I get them to sit down with a document that I have called a Dream Builder that basically is a checklist of all things good in life, from, basically ask them, what sort of house would you like to live in? What sort of car would you like to drive? What sort of holidays would you like to take? It includes, believe it or not, planes, boats, helicopters, the whole lot. And I get them to map out, for a 5 or 10 year window, what their ideal life would be like. And then I can take that and I can roughly say, well, what does that lifestyle cost? Is it, $5,000 a month? Is it 10 grand a month? 15, 20 or whatever. And once I have that figure, then of course we can then work that back to the business. It's going to be the business's job to provide that money. So if this guy needs 15 grand a month to lead the life that he wants to lead, how big does the business need to be in order to give him that money? So then I will set the business goals really based on the owner's requirement. So it's a much it's more solid foundation, if you like, a much more motivational. There is a challenge with that though, because very often, I don't know whether it's particularly over here, because we're a smaller island than you guys are, but the island community, we're generally quite modest about what we want for ourselves, and we're generally quite satisfied, with what we would call our dream house or our dream car and so on. So I find that it doesn't often take much to get people to what they consider to be a dream. And I then have a challenge there, because our human inclination is to say, right, I've got where I want it to be. I'm going to hold it here. But a business is like a tree. I always say it's either growing or it's dying, but it's not just there. It's not
Mm,
just standing in situ. And the reason for that in the business world really is because the world that we are in is moving towards so fast and change is happening so often that if you are holding your business where it is and just happy with its level of turnover and profit and trying to keep it there, you probably are going backwards in reality, even though you don't realize it. So really, the interesting thing then with the business is it has to keep moving forward and it has to keep generating money, perhaps more money than you know what to do with.
mm.
So that's when I will ask the question then. They've got everything that they want personally in the material sense. And the next question then is, how is the world going to be a better place for you and your business having existed? That's where we want to get. And I've had clients who've built houses in Kenya, built villages in Kenya, built bits of hospitals, and donated huge amounts of money to charities. And a guy who was a rowing fanatic from university, and he built a rowing house, a boat house, sorry, on the river here in Belfast. And so on. There's been lots of different things, and that's where my own goal, came from. Of course, I need to be congruent with everything I try to teach everybody else, and so my big goal at the moment is to help create 100 millionaires by the time I'm 60, and so that when they put me in the box, hopefully not for a long time yet, and there'll at least be 100 people there saying I wouldn't be where I am today without Tony's help. So that's what
That's
keeps
amazing.
me moving forward and keeps me grounded.
I think one of the I'm going to talk about one of the hurdles that I've had as a business owner, a small business owner, is partnerships. So,
Yeah.
I understand for business to succeed, you have to be really good at what you do. You have to make that widget. So you're really good at making widgets. But if there's no one out there to buy the widget, but you're just good at making widgets. And so a lot of small businesses will have partnerships where one person is really good at making the widget and one person's really good at bringing in new business. And I've seen a lot of division, a lot of separation where the person who makes the widget feels that they're more valuable because they're making the widget. And the person who's getting in the new business thinks, hey buddy, without new business, you're not going to be able, so there's these things.
Yes.
My partner's father is a very successful at what he does in Europe. And I had some trouble with a business partner of mine, and he in his broken English was like, Nick, you need an odd number of business partners, and 3 is too many. So I was like, oh, this is
So,
very wise, a
so you
man.
said 5?
Well, I
7?
if 3 is too many, my math's pretty good to say
Yeah,
that
that's true.
I've got to keep it. I've got to keep it
Yeah,
down to
yeah,
me. So what's your advice
yeah.
with small business owners who, like I say, they're really good at what they do, but getting in, new business is key. Cash flow is essential to keep businesses, running, especially today. It's so every market's very clouded. So what are your recommendations with regards to small businesses and partnerships?
Absolutely. I would be exactly the same as your father-in-law, and I would just say exactly that in a much less clever way, and avoid them at all costs, really. And it's just, again, 18 years of experience, and probably in that time, like, I could count on the fingers of, if not one, two hands, the number of successful partnerships that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly what it is, but unfortunately, it's probably just that, when you have business partners and then the thing gets successful and so on. Unfortunately, those less pleasant human traits tend to start coming through, whether it's greed and envy and jealousy and just lots of horrible little things just start to pop up, and just in most cases, and I include in this father, son, mother, daughter, brother, relationships, and rarely, it just causes an awful lot of trouble. So I would say avoid it. But really, as you say, kind of everyone can't be good at everything, and even increasingly so in this world. When I talk about the speed of the world, it's really a reason for my existence. Really is, and it's very hard for any individual to run any business on their own right now, to keep up with all the issues in financial areas and tax and all that sort of thing, and HR and employment law and this, that, and the other. Now in sales and marketing, digital marketing, okay, it's 10 years old if you like now, but it's just changing. And now there's the metaverse, and now there's this, and now there's that. And never mind, obviously, if it's widgets, what's going on in widgets, and all of that. So it's really too much. I find. So so a business owner really has to leverage themselves, and really it's going to be through other people. So it doesn't have to be a partner, but it can be, an outsourced organization or an employee that comes in to do the marketing, that comes in to do the sales, and comes in, to do the stuff that they themselves maybe aren't good at, or aren't natural with. But and that has evolved over time, because I would have said early, 18 years ago, you have to learn.
Yeah.
You have to learn yourself, if and be able to do it yourself, and so on. But now it's pretty much impossible to do it all yourself. So you just have to lean on others, and that's what I would say to them.
No, it was my thing, and I was trying, always trying to be altruistic and open for partnerships, because I couldn't do it all myself. But what I have found is that you're right, there are other relationships you can have with people without giving up, and you can maybe some shares in your business, but can be part of the deal. But a lot of people have problems with cash flow. To offer somebody 20 or 30,000 pounds a year to come in and do some work can be a big strain on people. So people tend to leverage those, like you say, those relationships, and say, "Oh, I'll make you a partner, come in and do some sweat equity." So my advice is to be careful, as yours is to be careful around that. But now, what I'm always reflecting on my own business, and the things that I really do feel deep down are necessary for me. And I feel like, if we're coming to running a business from a place of fear, like, if I don't do this, then I'm going to lose this, or if I do this, I'm not going to get what I want. Always coming from a fear state. I tend to be more restricted in my beliefs and my abilities, and I want to try to, now we're flying through time, but to give some tools to people, because I know that as we operate as people, like I was listening to the Andrew Huberman podcast the other day. He's in neuroscience, and he's like, everything a human looks at, they look at in this way of how long is it going to take, duration, the pathway to get to the outcome. So duration, pathway, outcome. I'm okay at this is going to take a little bit of time, and I really like the outcome, but I'm very not good at the pathway, which I imagine are the tools that you give people. Exactly. Which is about being prepared. And that's where I suppose the motivation to start preparing yourself, that even though you're good at making widgets, there's a lot of stuff that happens in the back end to make your business successful. So what are some of the tools that maybe I can start applying, or other businesses like me that are quite a one-man band, got a great product, but I need a little bit more structure, let's say, to becoming the success that I want it to be.
Well, that's the word, structure, I was just going to use. That's, I guess, what I provide people with, and there is really 6 key steps that I would take people through to get to that commercial, profitable enterprise that effectively works without them. And I time frame, I would be looking at 10 years maximum. You should be able, and an average business owner actually could be retired and financially free within 10 years if they know what to do and how to do it right. And as I say, the reason I am still a license holder for Action Coach is that, obviously this structure, has been working all over the world for lots and lots of businesses. But then obviously now in 18 years, I've seen it work, myself locally, so many times now that, I have 100%, confidence that it is a very rational, logical way to go about things. So the first step, whenever I tackle any business, the first step, we call it mastery, but really it's about checking out the foundations of what is there first, and before you start to build anything more. Because if the foundations are flaky, start to build, the whole thing's going to come toppling down. So I dig deep and check out the foundations, and really there's 4 areas of that. One we've already talked about, which is the goals, and so on. Then there's financial mastery, and this is an area I find is very poorly understood, very poorly looked after, by the average business owner, the whole financial side of it. And so once we have our business goals set, I want them to usually break those goals back down to probably a sales and then profit objective for each of the next 5 years. And then the closest year, the current year that we're about to enter, etc., I would insist on a profit and loss budget. So basically, the sales figure that we're going for the year broken down into 12 figures, and taking into account any seasonality that the business has, and that gives the owner a sales objective. Then obviously we set against that the expenses, the costs of those sales, and then the overheads that the business has. And at the bottom of the sheet, we have a monthly profit figure adding up to the profit goal that we have set in the goals area. And then month by month as we go through, we check how have we done, on that. And effectively it's the financial roadmap that we're going to follow. And it's amazing, Nick, when you lay that down, and importantly have it written down and so on, how the business actually then suddenly kind of seems to know where it needs to go, even on its own, because you've given it the map, and so that's the probably one of the main documents, that we're using, constantly following that map. And on top of that, there are other issues that are pretty understood, things like cash flow. And if I say to the average business owner, what's cash flow like? Very often they'll hold up a bank statement and say, and I go, well, no, that's what you've got in the bank. Cash flow is typically projected at least 6 months out, usually on a weekly basis rather than a monthly basis, like the budget. And so on. And there's a document then, that's actually relatively easily put together if you have your objectives on the sales side, and then historical costs. We know when the wages get paid, we know when the electricity bill arrives, etc., and we can project all of that forward to effectively give a projection as to what will be in the bank account of the business at the end of every week for the next six months. And that's an important thing, because if you have a poor month, it's not usually that month that you feel it because there's a bit of money in the bank. It's 2 or 3 months down the line where you get caught out by a poor month. And then things like break evens and so on, we go through, what is the break even for the year? What is the break even for the month, for the week, for the day, even in certain circumstances? At what point am I making money for myself, and these sorts of things that I want them to know about. The third foundational thing is basically, we call it delivery mastery. Is the business doing a good basic job for the customers that it already has, before we start doing any more? I heard of a coach in Nottingham or somewhere who went to see a restaurant owner, and the guy was saying, oh, help me, get me more customers. I need more customers for the restaurant. The coach went straight out, helped him get more customers, and there's more people in the restaurant. But what he hadn't realized was that restaurant hadn't mastered some of the basics of taking an order at a table, getting the order into the kitchen, getting the correct food made, warm in a sensible amount of time, and deliver back to the customer. So by that guy just following blindly what the owner felt he wanted, and more customers, he was actually making the business worse, and making the situation worse. So So it's important to check that. And the other thing I'm a fan of at that stage as well is if there isn't a measure in place, actually putting a measure of customer satisfaction in at that stage. Because if one of our objectives is to help you as a business owner step back from the business, probably one of the few things you're going to be worried about at that stage is, are my customers happy? Are my customers being looked after? So you'll always want to see that information, even whenever you've taken a step back. The last part of that foundational thing is the time, and to understand, what the owner's attitude to time and what they're doing with their time. So obviously, if somebody's already working 70, 80 hours a week, last thing I want to do is add to that and say, well, you're going to have to do 5 or 10 hours on the stuff I want you to do, and make it even worse. So I have to at that stage chisel out the time that I need for that business owner. And that can be a very simple process of basically saying, you have to write down for me what you are doing, every half hour. And then we take a look at it, in some sort of a sensible way. One of my favorite tools is a Foursquare matrix with value down one side and fun along the other.
Mm-hmm.
And any activity such as, I did my VAT return the other night, which is clearly low fun and low value. And those are the things that we're wanting to outsource or delegate, or when it comes to games of solitaire on the computer, just stop them altogether.
Yeah.
And so that there is time to do the work that I need them to do. So those are the 4 key areas I always check through and make sure that those are right. And once those foundations are in place, then we move to the next one, which is called niche, but it's really all about sales and marketing. It's just get the money in, and start hitting those targets. Don't worry about systems and processes and team and all of that. Let's just start hitting the targets, and it's obviously called niche because of the importance for every business of really having a niche. Because if you have a niche, then it takes you away from competition and away from price issues and all that sort of thing. If 2 or 3 businesses are basically the same, well, really, there's only one area to compete on, and that's price, and that becomes a downward spiral that nobody wants to get into. So, that's an important part. Establishing that niche is an important part of that. But there is a key thing, a key tool, probably the most important tool. I call it the 5 ways that I use to help people then get up to speed on the money and help grow the business. And really, there are 3 things that most business owners are looking for. It's either more customers, more turnover, or more profit.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about it, actually, those things are the outcome of other activities. They're a consequence. So when it comes to more profit or more customers, what actually gives you a customer is firstly a lead. So somebody ringing your telephone, somebody walking through your shop door, that type of person. But then that lead actually has to be converted from an inquiry into somebody who is actually parting with money. So getting a new customer is actually a 2-stage process. You can't actually even go directly to a new customer. So I break it down like that. So I treat lead generation and conversion separately, and we do actions in both areas. Then when you have a bunch of customers, there's 2 key drivers to the turnover. One is the average number of transactions we do with those customers and the average value of those transactions. So at the simplest level, if we had a little business with 400 customers and on average they come to see us 4 times a year, and each time they come they spend £100, our turnover is going to be 400 times 4 times 100, I think, are the numbers I used, But that's this at the simplest level. So the key drivers that I focus on are average sale and average number of transactions. And then once you have your turnover times margin is the profit. So the 5 areas are lead generation, conversion rate, average sale, number of transactions, and profit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you might think, okay, right, we start at the front, start with the leads, but we don't. We start at the back, and we get the profitability into shape. And then most businesses, of course, already have customers. So before we go crazy on anything else, we have a look at, well, how often are those customers buying? Could they buy more often if we did some things differently? And when they're buying, could we sell them more? Could we get them to get the average sale increase and so on? So we maximize those areas within reason. Then, of course, if customers, they probably have leads as well. So we look at, for the leads that you already have, what's your conversion and how well are you selling? Basically, conversion is the selling part. So how well are you converting those, and get that to maxed out within reason. And only then do we then tackle the leads and creating more leads for the business. Because if we charge in on the leads, then we might find, having spent some money on marketing or something like that, then we find out that we can't sell and or we can't retain the customers once we have them. So it's much more sensible to make sure we can retain customers, make sure we can convert leads, then go and get more leads. So it's a very structured thing. And there's a little bit of magic in that formula, Nick, because if I say to the average business owner, what would you like to see on this side from the business in the next year? Some will say, well, growth would be good. And I go, right, okay, how much? And some, very often they say, well, 10% would be amazing. I go, really, 10%? Look at what's happened with the cost of fuel and the cost of all sorts of things, even wages and so on, the pressure. Probably if the business is growing by 10% each year, it's probably still standing still, So really a good challenge for most business owners is firstly to find out what those numbers are, those 5 numbers that we went through there. Find out what they are, because not every business owner knows what they are. And if they're going to improve them, they must know what they are. And then look at increasing each of the figures by 10%. So let's say somebody gets 500 leads a year. Could you do 550?
Yeah.
If you work out from those 500 that 200 become or 250 become customers, that's 50% conversion. Could you make it a 55% conversion? If they come and see you 4 times a year, could you make it 4.4 on average? If they spend £100, could you make it £110? Because if you can achieve those 4 things, what happens is the turnover grows by 46%. And if you grow the margin by 10% as well, the profits will go up by 61%. Mathematical fact. Put any numbers into that sort of formula and you'll see it. So 10% growth in each of those areas will give you close to 50% growth in the sales of the business. So when I take on a client, that's the sort of number of growth, that's the amount of growth that we're aiming. Now, of course, don't always get it, but some exceed it, of course. Some get 100% growth and so on, and some get 30% growth. But even those who get 30% growth, of course, are pretty happy with that in any case, So that's the key thing. And then we step up, and then now we've got the money coming in, and we know how to grow the business and all that sort of thing. That now it's about trying to make it work without the owner. We've talked about that a little bit with the McDonald's idea and so on. So it's just the systems and processes that are in the business and getting them documented, and getting them trained in, and that type of thing. And actually, then the next step is team, because the interesting thing is, if you have good systems and processes in your business, then actually a lot of business owners find out they need fewer people than they thought they needed. And because the people are just there working the systems and the processes. So the team part of it is the next stage, once you know what you truly need. It's it's a little bit more fluffy maybe than the other things, because of course it involves human beings and that sort of thing. But it's really, it's all about obviously good leadership. It's about giving a team, it's interesting, we talk about sport at the beginning, and you say to most people, well, what makes a team a team? And the first obvious thing, particularly when you come to football and all the rest of it, is they're all wearing the same gear, and so on. But actually, in my mind, what makes a team is that when those 11 footballers or 15 rugby players or whatever it is are going onto the pitch, they're not only wearing the same thing, but they all have the same thing in their mind.
Yeah.
which is to win that match, win that cup, win that league, whatever it might be. They're all concentrated on the same objective. And I guarantee if you came over to me here in Belfast, or I came over to you, and we went out and we knocked on the doors of businesses with at least 11 team members, and we went in and we said, what's the goal around here? We'd probably get 11 different answers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So therefore, how can that be a team in the way that a sports team is a team, because they all have the same objectives? So simple things like a common goal for the business. And obviously the goals we've talked about so far can be quite personal to the owner in terms of financial achievement and things like that you might not want to share with your team. But it could be something as simple as winning a local business award, or something like that everybody can get behind, and so on. So we work on team. Then the next level we call synergy, which is really just bringing it all together. And things like if there's a vision and mission, that needs to be set for the business. We haven't done that yet for whatever reason. The icing on the cake, but the final step of synergy is appointing the general manager who's going to run the business, while you yourself are on the beach or doing whatever it's going to be. And the sixth step then is just called results. And it's only really when you get to there do you have a business that is truly passive. Also then a business that is duplicatable. Mm-hmm. One of the mistakes, a lot of people maybe say, I don't know, a cafe owner might have or might do is they open a cafe, it's bringing in some money, it's doing quite well, it's not taking over their lives, they've got some people working, they think, I'll get another one of these. But really you only duplicate when it is finished, when it is problem free, a bit like a file. If there are viruses on a file in your computer and you copy that file, suddenly you've got twice the number of viruses. If there are problems in one business still not sorted, and then you duplicate it, you just duplicate the number of business of problems that you have in business. So where chains of cafes or whatever stumble is because the first business wasn't problem free before it was duplicated, and so on. And of course, at that result stage, your other option, you can duplicate. The other option, of course, is to sell. And that takes us, back to that point of the business working without you, because yes, we should do well as business owners as we go along our 10-year path. We should make good money and so on, because we're taking risk and we're doing more than the average employee and so on. But the time when you really make your money is at the end on exit. And to get the best value for the business, of course, it has to work without you, because if you and the business are inextricably linked almost, and then you sell and do extract yourself away from it, what's left tends to be not terribly worthwhile. It might be a customer list or something like that. One very quick little story. Not too long ago, went to see a printer, and he has a firm here in Belfast. Went in, and the guy is shouting instructions. A couple of guys on printing machines at the side of the workshop. He's shouting instructions at them about the color of the work, and it's not right, and sort that out, blah blah blah. He has a telephone between his shoulder and his ear, and the customers are ringing up saying, "Where's my stuff? When can I pick it up?" There's a girl in the corner chasing money in, and he's shouting all sorts of obscenities about the customers who haven't paid, and so on. And I just said, "Look, you look like you're about to have a heart attack." And he says, "Oh, sometimes I feel like I am." And I said, "Okay, well, what would happen if you did?" He said, "Oh, I'd have to sell up." I said, okay, well, in 5 minutes, I've seen enough to know that we probably have to sell to another printer to have the technical knowledge to instruct those guys over there what to do with those presses. Yeah, that would be right. So how many hours are you working? Oh, minimum 70, very often 75 or 80. I said, okay. So we need to find a printer who wants to take over your 75-hour a week job. And I said, and you want money for this, do you? He says, I'd need at least 250 grand if I was going to retire at all, at least that. I said, okay, so we have to find a printer who wants to take over your 75-hour a week job and pay 250 grand for the privilege. the market is zero for that
Zero,
business,
yeah,
you know.
yeah, yeah.
Whereas if it worked relatively well without them, yes, you could sell it to a printer. You might be able to sell it to a publishing house or something that wants to print their own material, a graphic design company. You know, there's a market for a printing business that operates, you know, relatively freely. So that takes us back to the original the original definition of a business.
It's beautiful. Tony, we're out of time, buddy. I can't thank you
Okay,
enough for joining us. It's been amazing. How can people get in touch with you?
good. They can email. It's Tony Hayes at actioncoach.com. I even though an office space here, as you can see, and so on, mostly I operate through my mobile phone, and it's 07764 606027. And yes, I'll happily have a quick chat with anybody that thinks I can help them.
Beautiful. I think I'll have to have you on again soon because I want to get into the changing landscape of businesses in 2023. So let's look in the next few months about getting you on again, because I think that we ran out of time too quickly. It's but it's been amazing chatting with you. I really appreciate it. We will have you on again in a few more months, and we can kind of update people on again. It's just some things that I wanted to ask you today, but couldn't get them in. But thank you so much for all of your help, Tony. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for joining us, everybody in the Elephant and Castle community. Don't forget, we'll have another interesting guest coming up next week. So don't forget to join us then, and we'll see you later. Thanks a lot. Bye for now.